Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Tarot to the Nines, a long awaited episode because I've had a bit of time off because I had a stinky cold and although I didn't feel too bad, I just couldn't speak very much without coughing and sputtering, and I thought that wouldn't be very pleasant for you or for me, so I've held off on making this video, but I'm up and at 'em now and ready to get back into the game. And today, of course, we are talking about the long awaited number 9. Can you believe that we're up to number 9 already? I can hardly believe it myself, but we're up to number 9, and that means that technically we have almost covered every number in the tarot deck, because of course they all are grouped into constellations of 9, or 9 constellations. So I say almost because of course it doesn't quite cover all of the numbers, and a couple of you have asked me, or more than a couple of you actually have asked me, will you be doing a video on the court cards, even though they don't actually fit into the numerical constellations exactly? And the answer is yes, I will be doing a video on the court cards. That probably will be a video or two from now. And although we're up to number 9 in the number sequence, we are not at the end of the series of Tarot to the 9, because I still have a few other videos that I want to make. I need to finish off my video on the Enneagram, so that's going to probably be the next video. And I also want to do a video, or maybe more than one video, on resources that you can use in this course of study. So some of the books and the decks that I've already mentioned in this series, and also some that I haven't mentioned that would be very suitable for studying tarot and number and the evolution of consciousness through the tarot deck. So I definitely want to do a couple of videos on that, and I'll also probably do a video on bringing it all together, so a bit of a summary of what we've learned, and a bit on the philosophy that really has been kind of espoused, if you like, through this process of studying tarot and number. So all of that is still to come, and I'm looking forward to making those videos. But today we are focusing on the video for number 9, so let's get to it. Okay, so let's begin our discussion about the number 9 by doing what we've done in some of the previous videos, which is to look at the mathematical properties of the number, or some of the mathematical properties. And one of the interesting things about 9, and you'll see that this relates to the theme of this video very clearly, is that 9 leads back to itself. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, so if you add all of the digits from 1 to 9, in a line, if you write them in a line and you add them together, sum them, you get 45. And we know from our Pythagorean numerology that if you cross sum the numbers, then you're getting down to the kind of the root number, if you like, the constellation that the numbers relate to. So if you take all 9 numbers and add them together, you get 45. And what does 4 and 5 equal? It equals 9, of course. Also, if you write those numbers in a line and you sum them, so if you multiply them all together, so 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, etc, 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 up to times 9, the answer to that you get is 362,880. You cross sum those numbers and they come to 27. 2 and 7, of course, equals 9. And if you take 9 and you multiply it by any of the other digits from 1 to 9, including itself, apart from 0, of course, because it's not a digit, then what the ultimate result will be is 9. So 9 9s are 81, 8 plus 1 is 9, 9 2s are 18, 1 plus 8 of course is 9, 9 times 3 is 27, 9 times 8 is 72, in both cases it's 7 and 2 added together, you get 9, 9 times 5 is 45, and as we saw there, it adds back to 9. So you can do that with any single digit between 1 and 9. If you multiply it by 9 and then cross sum the digits in the result, you will get 9. If you multiply them, if you add them, you will get 9. So 9 constantly leads back to itself. And for me, that's a really important theme of the number 9. And it's a very important theme of this video and of this series. And that is that we are going back to the absolute. Now, let me just illustrate for you. You may remember, as we've been going through the other numbers, what I've tended to do is try and relate them symbolically in terms of what different symbols might mean in relation to the numbers. And you know, we looked at, for example, with 0, the idea of there being a void. 0 itself seems to suggest this emptiness, this void. from which something can appear, and that gives us 1, and then we looked at how 1 could become 2 and 3, etc, etc, etc. We looked also at number 5 and how the pentagram symbol represents mankind and the appearance, if you like, of humanity within this procession of consciousness that's represented by the numbers. We looked at the number 6 and how it looks a bit like an inward going spiral, and I talked about 6 being the point at which our consciousness begins to become more self-conscious and most importantly becomes conscious that it is self-conscious. So there's a kind of an awareness arising there as this spiraling inward happens. And the interesting thing for me about the number 9, and I mentioned this when I talked about the number 6, is that it also can be represented by a spiral, but it's a different kind of spiral, and it depends how you write the number, of course, but I think of the 9 as being an outward spiral. So whereas the 6 is spiraling inwards in terms of self-consciousness, the 9 is spiraling outwards and in a broader sense. And that makes sense when you consider that number 9 is the last of the final original number. Because once you get past 9, you're on to number 10. And number 10, of course, as we know, is really a different octave, if you like, of the number 1. So we've reached another level, a different level with 10. Now in some numerological systems, 10 is seen as the culmination. It's seen as the kind of the end point of a sequence of numbers, particularly when we're talking about the decad, as often numerologists do. But I actually think that 9 is the point of completion, or at least it's the point of integration and readiness for new levels. So it's the final point of the initial strand of evolution that can happen before we flip up into a new level, an enhanced level of consciousness. And we'll talk a bit about that when we get to the number 9s in the tarot cards. But I think of 9 as being this kind of spiraling outwards and upwards. So we are actually becoming more and more conscious of our wholeness, more and more conscious that we and the entirety of everything that we saw represented in this nothingness that is also everythingness, that we and that are the same. And also, of course, if you look at the number 9, it looks rather like a 0. So we have literally gone back to the 0. It's just that it's the 0 bursting out of itself. It's a 0 moving into a different level of consciousness, elevation and evolution, if you like. Now the other thing about 9, of course, is that it really enshrines the very sacred number 3, because we talked about 3 as being the point at which creation was really possible. So we have the nothingness, then we have duality, and from duality we're able to have that third force. And when the third force arrives, the stasis and the magnetized balance that's created by the polarity of 2, which in theory could just remain as 2 because there would be equal and opposite forces that just remain in this constant balanced state, then the third force comes along and we've got the arrowhead that moves us into action and creation can happen. So the 3 gives birth to the 10,000 things, etc, etc, as we see in the 𝙑𝙄𝙬𝙊𝙬. And 9, of course, is 3 times 3. So we've got this kind of trinity amplified. So not only do we have three single things, we have 3 sets of 3. So it's like the sacred triad, the full expression of the Trinity. 3 trinities in one. Now I want to read you a little quote from one of the books we've been using in this series, and that is The Meaning and Philosophy of Numbers by Leonard Bosman. And he's actually quoting from a book called Theoretic Arithmetic. The author is Taylor, but the quote is actually from an anonymous writer. So we don't know who wrote this, but this is quoted in the book, and it's about the properties of 9. 9, now the name for 9 is Ennead, the Greek name. So that there can be no number beyond the Ennead, but that it circulates all numbers within itself is evident from the regression of numbers. For the natural progression of them is as far as 9, but after it their retrogression takes place. for 10 becomes 1. Remember, because we're cross-summing 1 and 0, goes back to 1. For 10 becomes 1, as it were, again the monad, the 1. Thus, if from each of the numbers 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 and 19, the number 9 is subtracted, the numbers that remain will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And vice versa. The progression will receive an increase by the addition of 9. For if to each of the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., 9 is added, the numbers produced will be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, etc. Likewise, by subtracting from 20 twice 9, from 30 thrice 9, and from 40 4 times 9, from 50 5 times 9, etc., the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 will be produced. By taking likewise from 100, 11 times 9, we again return to the monad, and after the same manner we may proceed to infinity. Hence, it is not possible there should be any elementary number beyond the Ennead, 9. Hence they called it ocean and horizon, because all numbers are comprehended by and revolve within it. Now, I like that quote because the numbers revolve within it makes me think of the spiral, and the idea of it being whole and everything being in it reminds me of the wholeness that we saw emphasized by the number, or by the symbol 0. And for me that's really important to the theme of this series, because one of the things I've been trying to convey, and certainly one of the things that is a fundamental part of if you like, my tarot philosophy, is that the major arcana progression from the Fool onwards represents the evolution of consciousness and the way that consciousness changes form and apparently develops in a linear fashion as it moves from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and the Fool does this journey through the major arcana. I showed in a previous video that for me one of the most moving and profound representations of the World card appears in the tarot of the pagan cats, and the reason it's very profound is that in the Fool card of that deck you see a little cat scampering about on this cliff edge chasing a butterfly, but dreaming. And the dream that it has as it's chasing this butterfly, this elusive butterfly, and it's teetering on this kind of dangerous cliff edge, the dream it has is of itself sitting on a cushion with a saucer of milk in a very kind of zen-like repose, just completely at peace with itself. And so we see that kind of duality of us in the world, active, going for things, trying to make something of ourselves, chasing after our aspirations as represented by the butterfly, but at some level wanting to be at peace and repose. And in the World card in that deck, you see the same little cat, and it's sitting on a little cushion with a saucer of milk beside it, and it's dreaming. And it's dreaming of itself sitting on the saucer of milk with sitting on the cushion with a saucer of milk beside it, not sitting in the saucer of milk with a cushion beside it. Although that would be fine too. And for me, what's important about that is that it emphasizes the idea that when we reach this kind of pinnacle of spiritual evolution, if you like, what the great masters tell us, and if you look at the mystical teachings of mystical Christianity, if you look at what Buddhism says, if you look at Taoism, if you look at some of the what we might say enlightened beings of the world like Ramana Maharshi and so on, what you see is that they tell us again and again that peace comes from and transcendence comes from a recognition that there is no difference between what we want to be and what we are. Where conflict and tension and density comes from is when there is a mismatch, when we are doing and being something but wishing we were something else. We're cut off from our awareness of our totality and the absolute rightness of reality, because in this mundane material world, if you like, things aren't always right, things aren't always okay, things aren't always perfect. But what mysticism tells us, and what the world's great wisdom traditions tell us, is that the world of materiality, with all of its ups and downs and yeses and nos and rights and lefts and so on, is an illusion, and that the real world, reality, is something that is complete and whole within itself. And it's really well illustrated in that card, because it's a bit like the little cat has gone through this journey and it got to where it wanted to be, and the realization is simply that the matching up of what it wants to be and what it actually is peace. It's not altering things in the material world that gives us peace. It's being at peace with who and what we really are, and what we really are is everything. And the number sequence, or the digit sequence from 0 to 9 remind us of this, that really it's the same. It's just that when we're at 9, we're able to go up to a higher level of realization. But really, we haven't left this wholeness. And 9 shows us that, both in terms of the symbol and the way that it looks, but it also shows us that in the way that it behaves. Because as you saw from when I described the mathematical properties, the number 9, ultimately, if you add it in, if you multiply it by, if you remove it from, ultimately you're going to get back down to that totality of the original 9 numbers. You never leave that, and really you never really leave the 0. So one of the ways I think of the Fool, some people in tarot see the Fool as being this being who progresses through the major arcana and meets the different archetypes of the major arcana. Other people see the Fool as being a being that transforms into each of the different parts of the major arcana. So the Fool becomes the magician and then becomes the high priestess. How I think of it actually is a bit more like the Fool. All of the characters in tarot, all of the major characters and the archetypes of the major arcana, and all of the happenings in the minor arcana, and all of the kind of psychological states of the court cards, if that's how you think of the court cards, they all come from the Fool. There is nothing in tarot that is not in the Fool. So the Fool, in a sense, is not the nothing of the tarot, although it's often represented as that. It's the everything of the tarot. And when you get to number 9, you are at the point where the Fool is aware of the fact that it is everything, and is able to go on to the next level of evolution. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we come to the numbers. The other thing to say about 9, of course, is that it is very important in all kinds of mystical traditions. So you see the Fool, you see the number 9, the Ennead, the Nonagon, as it's sometimes called, pop up in all kinds of different spiritual and religious traditions over the world. And I've just got some of them written down here, so I will read them to you. I don't want to miss any of them out. So Odin spent 9 days hanging on the Tree of Life, 𝙑𝙄𝙉𝙆𝙎. Troy was besieged for 9 years. The Greek goddess Demeter searched for 9 days for her daughter Persephone, who had gone down into the underworld, and part of the deal in terms of getting Persephone back from the underworld, back from Hades, was that she could spend 9 months above ground, and that's why we have 9 months of temperate weather and then before the winter comes back. In certain parts of the world. The Greeks, they said that if you dropped an anvil into the underworld, it would take 9 days to reach the bottom. The Greeks also had the 9 muses. The Egyptians had 9 gods, and they were known as, they have been called the Ennead, and I think I've got a picture of those. Let me just see. I think we have a picture of those in this book. Here they are, the 9 gods. Can you see that? I want to make sure, that's better, isn't it? And this, of course, is from this trusty book, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. So then we have the 9 worlds of the Odinic mysteries as well. So again, from that tradition. What else? In Celtic theology, of course, we have the triple goddess. So the triplicity that I spoke about earlier is very important. And we have 9 maidens who attended to the goddess in the form of Bridget. In ancient China, they had 9 social laws, they had 9 classes of officials, and they had 9 sacred rites that were important to their theology. And one of the most compelling mystical symbols that we have, of course, is the symbol of the labyrinth. And quite often people think of labyrinths as being kind of like mazes, but they're not mazes because you don't have a dead end in a labyrinth. A labyrinth is a single path that weaves around in a particular way. And if any of you have ever walked a labyrinth, I've done a spiritual practice that involves walking a labyrinth. The idea is that you walk the labyrinth and you do it in a meditative way, and you take into the labyrinth a question or a problem perhaps, and you reach the center and you give it over to the labyrinth, and you seek insight, and you come out hopefully renewed and refreshed with a bit more insight. But the labyrinth is based on the number 9, because if you write, let's see, I think I might need to turn the light down a bit. If you draw 9 dots in a cross formation, you can use that to form the paths of the labyrinth by joining them together in a specific way. So 9 is very much at the foundation stone of the labyrinth, and of course the labyrinth is a really important spiritual symbol. So the other thing that is related to 9 is, of course, the Enneagram. And the Enneagram is a process. Now, we've been talking in this video series, or I've been talking in this video series, a bit about the Enneagram of Personality. And I've already covered a couple of the triads. I've done the head triad and the heart triad. And probably my next video is going to be on the gut triad, the instinctive triad. But the Enneagram of Personality involves 9 personality types. And those 9 personality types are a way of describing the totality of human personality and human motivation and so on. But the reason that the Enneagram works, and the reason that the Enneagram of Personality works so well, is that the Enneagram is actually a process that works beyond personality. It emerged before the Enneagram of Personality did. And really it's a way of looking at whole events as a particular outer sequence with hidden inner connections. A bit like you are a whole event in creation, and you have hidden inner connections within you. We all do, and the Enneagram is a great symbol of that. And actually, we talk about the Enneagram of Personality, but you can use the Enneagram to illustrate any other process. And in this book, it gives a very clever example of how the process of feeding diners at a restaurant can be linked together by the Enneagram. So you draw the 9 points, and you have different stages. Each of the 9 points are labelled differently. Hark! I hear a telephone. That was my neighbour calling, probably because she has some post for me, probably a tarot deck. So the Enneagram can represent this process of diners having their food prepared, and the different points would be things like kitchen gets ready for work, kitchen is at work, there's raw food to cook, the food is prepared, you cook the food, there's the diners in place seated, then you serve the meal, you eat the meal, and the dirty dishes go back to the kitchen. And the way that the Enneagram works, of course, is the different points are connected in particular ways, and you see that in any process, any kind of cyclical whole process, you can connect things together using the Enneagram system, and they relate both as individuals but also as different kind of connections. So the Enneagram process is an important part of the properties of the number 9, which is why I've included it as part of this series. So I'm not just flapping my gums when I insert the Enneagram. It wasn't a kind of random choice. It is all part of the process. So those are some of the properties of number 9. Those are some of the ways that number 9 shows up in mystical traditions, and a little bit about how I think the number 9 relates to the totality of tarot, and it's a bit like going back to a renewed awareness of our wholeness before we go on to the next level of evolution. So now let's have a look at how that's played out within the cards. So now a quick look at the cards of this constellation, which is the constellation of the Hermit. And the constellation of the Hermit includes, of course, the Hermit itself, the Moon, and the cards in the minor arcana that are numbered 9. And for me, the theme of this constellation and the theme of the number 9 is very much about illumination and intensity. And the illumination side of things you really see in the cards of the major arcana. And in a sense, it's about the contrast between illuminating the way ahead, which is what the Hermit's lamp is doing, and illuminating the way behind us, which is perhaps what the moon could be seen as doing. And the way that I think about it really is the two sides of illumination. So you can have that illumination of what's to come, you can have illumination of what's behind us, you can have the illumination of what's above, so illumination in terms of self-consciousness, self-awareness, contemplation that allows us to become more aware of who and what we are, which we see very much reflected in the number 9, where 9 becomes conscious of its wholeness. But also the kind of illumination that we see in terms of what's below. So the kind of illumination we might need to do if we were doing shadow work, for example. The illumination of the unconscious and of the subconscious, which is very much symbolized by the moon. And you could also see the illumination contrasting the illumination of what's known, or what we can know, and the illumination of what's unknown, what we can never really know because it's always at some level behind our awareness or beyond our awareness. But the theme for me in both of these cards, very much, and if you are a Hermit Moon person, if that's your tarot birth card pair, or the Hermit is your tarot constellation, then you can be sure that part of the theme of your life will in fact be to look at how illumination plays out in your life and what that means and how it can mean different things at different times. So that's in terms of the majors, very much that kind of illumination. And you can see, I mean, apart from anything else, we talked about that kind of spiraling outwards into a new level of awareness. You can see that the Hermit very much symbolizes this idea of reaching a new level of awareness, this kind of wise teacher archetype. And there's a humility in the Hermit as well. You know, we don't see the Hermit, at least as depicted in the 𝙑𝙀𝙉𝙆𝙎 deck, showing off his or her knowledge and wisdom, but rather inwardly being aware of it and allowing that inner contemplation to shine forth through the Hermit's lamp. So illumination very much plays out in the major arcana. In the minor arcana, I tend to agree with Rachel Pollack's assessment of what the 9s mean in the minors, and that is that they depict the elemental quality of their respective suit at the highest possible degree, or a very high degree, and as such they relate to intensity. So, you know, with swords we see a depiction of grief, and we see in a sense, the challenge of this card is becoming aware of our self-criticism. So what this card really so effectively illustrates, I think, is that a great deal of our pain and trauma and mental anguish is exactly that. It comes from our thoughts, it comes from our perspective on things. That's not to say that it's wrong. It's really important when we look at things like this that we're not victim shaming. It's not about saying that you're thinking the wrong thing or you should just change your mind and everything will be fine. But it's recognizing that our pain comes from our awareness of the world and our judgment about whether what we're experiencing in life is on or off in some way. And so the challenge here is this challenge of reconciling self-criticism and being able to think clearly without being overly harsh with ourselves, and being compassionate with ourselves. I did a video recently, by the way, on tarot and self-compassion and how we can find more self-compassion through tarot, and there's a reading that goes along with that, so I'll link that below. So that's the intensity of the suit of swords and the challenge of the suit of swords. Remember the minor cards, if you have this constellation, the minor cards are your challenges and opportunities. And the challenge in the swords is very much this challenge of self-criticism. If we look at cups, the intensity that's expressed here is the intensity of joy, of that kind of enjoyment of what one has. Like anything, of course, it can tip over into avarice. I think it depends on your perspective. You might look at this card and think, well, there's a jolly chap who's really enjoying what he has and his emotional abundance. Another way of looking at it is, here is a jolly chap, or maybe not so jolly chap, depending on how you see him, with his arms crossed. Maybe he looks a bit smug, guarding these cups and saying, these are all mine, ha ha ha, you can't have them. So there's something there about the intensity of joy, but a question for us: are we sharing that joy, or are we trying to hold on to it and keep it for ourselves? But there's something there about of a gift, I think. In terms of wands, we see the intensity that's expressed there is the intensity, I think, of the fruits of one's labour, the kind of enjoyment and you know, to some extent, satisfaction, not without cost. He looks like he's got a bandage on his head, but you know, somebody who has stood up for what they believe in, perhaps, who is exhibiting courage, and that perhaps is the gift that's articulated in this particular suit of wands. And then in pentacles we have the lady in her garden, looking very secure, looking very stable. There's something there of a kind of a lush security in this image, and for me, perhaps the gift that this indicates is this gift of individuation, of attainment, of material attainment, but in a way that marries emotional maturity, spiritual attainment as well. And I do like this card because you can see at the bottom there is a little snail, and I have decided that snail is called Brian, like the snail from the Magic Roundabout. So there you are, Brian the snail. So yeah, so we see this kind of gift of individuation and attainment there. So for me, the minors are very much about this kind of intensity. And one of the things that's worth being aware of is that Anjali's Arian, in her book, the Tarot Handbook, arranges the cards in a kind of a bridge arrangement. That's the archetypal matrix that she describes. Now, of course, they have to be joined together in order to be a bridge. But you could look at that as being the way of moving what's unconscious to consciousness, joining together unconsciousness and consciousness, and linking things together in a kind of a bridging process. And it also symbolises, of course, the crossing that we're about to make. When we get to number 9, we're about to cross over into a new level, where to some extent the sequence of numbers begins again. So number 10, of course, goes back to number 1 if you reduce it. But it goes back to number 1, it isn't number 1, it is 10. So we are then working at kind of 2 levels. We've got that archetypal level of the original 9 digits, always underlying every number that comes after. But we've then got this symbolisation of life lived at a new level, and a level where we've learned and integrated all of our lessons and opportunities and our challenges, and we've seen for ourselves how consciousness can evolve and develop. So that's a quick canter through the cards, and I want to finish this video by giving you a spread, and I've called this spread, in keeping with the theme of the card that I've just described, the Illumination Spread. Back in a sec. So here we are with the Illumination Spread, and what I want you to do to start with is get whichever deck of cards you want to use, whichever deck of tarot cards you want to use, and take the Hermit and the Moon card out of the deck and put them at the head of your reading. So they are part of your reading automatically. In a sense, they are the significators of your reading. Then you take the rest of the cards and you shuffle them, and you answer these questions. You do whatever you need to do as you begin a reading. You go into a meditative state. I would recommend at least taking a moment or two of silence before you begin, and you shuffle the cards and you ask the following 4 questions. And you can pull as many cards as you want to answer each question. You could pull 1 card for each question, that would be absolutely fine, or you could pull 2 or 3 or 4. I wouldn't really recommend doing more than 3. That would be my personal preference. I think if you go beyond 3, it begins to you introduce a level of complexity that isn't always helpful, but it's entirely your choice. For illustrative purposes, I've got a couple of cards for each of the places, but it's up to you. So you do whatever you need to do to prepare for your reading. You go into a meditative state, take a moment or two of silence, you shuffle the cards and you ask the following 4 questions, and you pull cards for each of these. The first question is, what does the hermit illuminate? In other words, what does the hermit want you to see? You pull a couple of cards, or 1 card, however many you want for that question. And question 2, what does the moon reveal? In other words, what's already there but hidden from you that can now be revealed by the moon's light? You pull your cards for that. Number 3, where will I find my light? So in other words, where will you get steer and direction from within yourself, and in what area of your life will it appear? And you pull the cards for that. And then what you do for the final one is, what will I learn? And you pull as many cards as you want for that. Another way of doing it that would be quite interesting is for each of these, if you're pulling 2 cards for each of these, is to split your deck up into minors and majors, and pull 1 major and 1 minor for each of the questions, because then you get the kind of archetypal theme behind the answer, as well as perhaps something a bit more in relation to the mundane world. So you do whatever you want to do to make those questions work for you using your deck of cards. And then finally, just as an added bonus, one of the things I really like to do in a tarot reading, particularly when it's a reading for self-understanding and self-illumination, and one where you might come out of the reading with some thoughts of actions to take to move you forward in your own development. What I like to do is find out who are my allies. Who are my allies that can guide me and help me along the way? And the way that I do that is using a theme that we've used very much throughout this video series, and that's numerological reduction. So you take the numbers of each of the cards you've pulled, whether it's 1 for each of the questions or 2 or more, you add up the numbers. So if it's the 2 of Pentacles, that means 2. If it's the Death card, that's number 13, etc, etc. If it's Court card, by the way, if it's a Page, that means number 11 because it comes after 10. Knights are 12, Queens are 13, and Kings are 14. So you're taking each of the cards in the deck and giving it a numerical value based on what's on the face of it, or where it is in the sequence of numbers, or the sequence of the suit. And then you write those numbers down and you add them all up. So if it was the 2 of Pentacles and the Death card, you'd add 2 to 13. If it's the 7 of Swords, you'd add 7 to, let's say that was the Strength card, 7 plus 8. And you add them all up, all the numbers in your reading, until you get a total. And you want that total ultimately to be between 1 and 21, because that's obviously going to be your major card, or 1 and 22 actually, because 22 will equal the Fool. And what you do is, once you've done that, you keep summing down and using the cross sum until you get a single digit or add digit that is between the numbers 1 and 22, and that tells you the major arcana archetype that is at the heart of your reading. That's the ally that's behind it. So that's the first thing you do. So you add the numbers of your reading together, and that will tell you which of the major arcana archetypes is your ally in integrating what you've learned in this reading. So I would do that. That's your first ally. And then your second ally is one that you choose, and you can do that either by going through your tarot deck and picking a card, one of the majors, or any card that you feel would be helpful for you, or you get another deck. You might get an oracle deck, or another tarot deck, or a Lenormand deck, or any deck that you like, one that is supportive to you, one that you would feel comfortable with having an ally from, and you go through that deck and you choose an ally. You select an ally. just based on your own intuition and your own desires, and that way you have got two allies. You've got the ally that has been given to you by this reading, by adding the numbers together and reducing them numerologically and finding out which of the major arcana archetypes is your ally. That's your first ally that is given, and your second ally is one that you choose. And these are your allies that can help you to integrate this illumination reading, this illumination spread into your life. You could prop them up on your altar, you could carry them with you, you could just carry them with you in your mind and your heart, whatever works for you. Then you've got two allies that are helping you along the path, just like the Hermit is illuminating the path and the Moon is illuminating the path. You've got your allies beside you, walking that path with you. So you've got light, daylight, you've got nightlight, you've got allies. What else do you need? You can get it, you can do it. So that is my illumination spread, and that is the number 9. So this isn't the last video, but I do want to just say a big thank you to all of you who have followed this process through to this point, because we have now done all of the numerical cards within the tarot deck. Now, my plan is for my next video to mop up my Enneagram videos. So I'll do the gut triad, the instinctive triad, which will be looking at types 8, 9 and 1, and that will be the Enneagram done. And then after that one I will do a video on the tarot court cards, and those will be that will be a look at the cards that haven't got numbers on them but sometimes can behave numerologically and also behave in very different ways as well. So once I've done that video, we will have literally done every single card in the tarot deck, and then after that I'll do a couple of videos on the resources and support that you can have in terms of continuing this course of study. But until then, thank you again very much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed having you, and if you've enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you're interested in learning more from this channel, please subscribe, and if you click the bell icon below, you'll be alerted to new videos, and hopefully a new video will be arriving very, very soon. So take care of yourselves, and until next time, thank you very much.